WuWa's older units starting to lose their luster? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Okay, before we continue any further, I would like to say, every main DPS in Wuthering Waves as of now is capable of clearing TOA. I am not trying to say that 1.x characters can't clear anymore, or that they're flat out bad. That is not the point that I am trying to highlight here by any stretch of the imagination, and yes, if you do put a bit of extra time and effort into these characters, they can definitely perform insanely well. I'm not trying to call them bad at all. However, what I am trying to point out is that I do feel like 1.x DPSs are starting to lose their luster in comparison to 2.x DPSs. We're seeing a genuine rise in power level, and I thought that this would be interesting to discuss. For starters, if we take a look at Shang Liao, who was a free DPS that came out in 1.2, he's soon being replaced by Augusta. And I personally think it's basically guaranteed that Augusta is going to be far better than him, simply because she's coming out in 2.x, and every 2.x DPS up until this point has been very, very strong. Your average 2.x DPS is now stronger than your average 1.x DPS, and the further and further we delve into 2.x, the more that this seems to be the case. I will say that this progression has been very natural, and it's still extremely easy to keep up with the meta if you're still using 1.x units, and I think that's very good. However, it's interesting to see how the meta has definitely shifted in favor of the 2.x units. It all started off with Carlotta, and her power level was definitely one of the highest in the game whenever she came out. At the time, Jinshi was the de facto strongest DPS that you could pick up. Phoebe was then added to the DPS roster in 2.1, and she has only continued to be a very powerful DPS over time, constantly receiving new teammates, and still having very impressive damage outputs whenever you use her in her absolution state. 2.3 gave us Zani, and to be fair, her max power level is locked behind quite high cost, but if you're willing to go through that cost, then you've got yourself a very strong main DPS character. And then 2.4 brought us Cardathea, who is obviously the strongest DPS in the game right now. That literally cannot be disputed. She is very, very powerful. And then we go on to get Frolova, we're gonna go on to get Augusta, and the list is just gonna continue on until we eventually get 3.x. So where does this leave the older DPS units of Wuthering Waves, or just the older units in general? When it comes to Jian, he's still definitely a viable pick, and he's still very strong to this day, which is why I'm saying that the game's balancing is still very good, because you can still choose this guy and clear TOA just fine. Still fantastic for mobbing content and such, although you can just play Cardathea if you want a much better aero DPS. Jinshi is still a very strong option, but damage-wise, she's definitely been topped out by the 2.x units. I'd say the interesting case with her is that they could actually bring her back into the meta anytime they wanted. Jojo is indeed her best second slot teammate, however, if they ever made a Jojo that has Spectro bonus on outro, along with other abilities that would support Jinshi, she could come right back into the meta again. Her damage is still quite good. But we definitely have stronger options now, and I would say that Spectro DPS is quite an oversaturated niche, because you have Jinshi, Absolution Phoebe, and Zani all as amazing viable options. Shang Liao is definitely the DPS that has it the roughest at the minute. Yes, you can still definitely play him well. He's not some horrible DPS by any means. But in terms of limited 5-star DPSs, he may actually be one of the worst at the minute. As it currently stands, he just can't compete with 2.x units. And with Augusta coming out, that's really sealing the deal. I feel like you don't really have any reason to use him unless you got him for free way back when he was available in 1.2. If you pull for him now and choose to invest in him, he's still going to clear, of course, and he'll still do just fine for you, but there are definitely better DPSing options nowadays, and there's not really anything in specific that he does that other DPSs can't do better. And with Augusta coming out soon as a very powerful Electro DPS, this is only furthering Shang Liao into irrelevancy. Definitely the 1.x DPS that currently has it the roughest. Camellia is interesting because I'd say that she's in a decent enough spot, as she's still very good for beginner players. You can stick her with Sanhua, give her an Emerald of Genesis, and she's going to perform just fine for you. But we honestly have plenty of other characters at this point who are able to be very good for beginners. Phoebe is the main example that I want to highlight. You can easily use her Spectre, Rover, and Sanhua and get by just fine. Both of those units are completely free. You can put her on a 4-star craftable, and she'll be just fine. As a beginner player, your two best possible pulls that you can make are Shorekeeper and Phoebe. And you can also easily go for Carlotta as well, who's actually getting a banner very soon. She's going to be running alongside Augusta. That character is able to use Static Mist, a standard 5-star weapon, and still feel really freaking strong. However, I will add that Camellia is really good in Whimpering Wastes. She is still very, very strong there indeed. This is very much still the case. So there's still definitely incentives to pick up Camellia in particular, but she definitely has more competition these days. However, most of these 1.x DPSs still feel very strong if you invest into them and can play them well. That's just because Wuthering Waves is generally a very well-balanced game. But we definitely have more powerful alternatives to them now. In terms of the supports or sub-DPS units, they're honestly all fine. I think that all of them aged very well. Juja, I would still say that she's a very good second slot teammate, because Carlotta has stood the test of time. The esteemed Montelli lady has proven that she is still a Warfall DPS even right now, so if you get her and you want to get her best in slot hypercarry team, then Juja's still a very good pull. And like I said before, you can also use her with Jinchi, and even though we do have better alternatives to Jinchi at this point, it's still another use case for Juja which is relevant in my opinion. I used to glaze Vasily Painter a while back, and I would say that her value has depreciated a little bit since then, mostly because Jinchi herself isn't really this insane be-all end-all DPS like she once was. And as powerful as Carlotta is, she definitely has other options now. And even with that being said, Carlotta's not the only DPS anymore that's capable of outputting her tier of damage. So investing into her specifically is very much more of a Carlotta-centric move, but even so, considering how powerful the DPS is, she's still good in my opinion. We all know at this point that Shorekeeper is easily the most well-aged of all of the 1.x units. She is still a very heavily sought-after unit, and for good reason. I don't have to repeat all the points as to why Shorekeeper is good. We all know already why she's good. She's broken, she's only going to continue to be broken, because giving a support crit buffing is one surefire way to make sure that they're always going to be relevant for the foreseeable future. So yes, we all know that Shorekeeper is definitely the most well-aged of all of the older units. In fact, I would still argue that she's currently the best character in the entire game and gets you the best value for your astrites. So we all already know this. But aside from her, I would say one wildcard that actually aged very well will be Changli. She honestly aged way better than I thought she would back whenever I first pulled for her. After all, she was coming hot off of the trail of Jinchi, who, might I remind you, whenever she came out, she absolutely blew the game up. She was very, very powerful, and continued to be strong for a super long time. And consider how on release, Changli didn't actually feel all that strong. She was kinda limited in her team options, and it took some time for people to understand how she was best played, which would be in Quickswap of course. But she's honestly only continued to be a very strong unit up until this point. Kuro Games has supplied her with plenty of good supports, namely Brant Weathering Waves, and then Brant himself of course later got Lupa, thus creating the Triple Fusion team. And along the way, even before the Pirate Lad came out, she's always been able to be played in Quickswap teams. Basically, if you were willing to put in the effort to learn Quickswap, you had a very strong unit on your hands. Because although it does require very fast inputs and knowledge of swap windows in each team you're playing, the results would always show, making her a very flexible character. Even to this day, she's a very effectively flexible unit that's able to slot into many different team scenarios. And there's even a more easy way to play her if that's not really your thing, that being hypercarry with Brant in the team. So outside of Shorekeeper, I honestly think that Changli ended up being the most well-aged 1.x unit, which I don't really think anybody could have seen coming. I mean, arguably you could have, because it is a general rule of thumb that support-type characters or sub-DPS-type characters do tend to age better than main DPS characters, because they get replaced far less often, and Changli also has a very unique playstyle, and now that people actually understand it, I feel like it's only going to continue to be relevant for a long time. So Changli has not fallen off even a little bit. She has only exponentially become better and better ever since she first came out, and at this point, she's an amazing pull to be honest. You could recommend her to somebody under so many different circumstances, provided that they're willing to learn her playstyle. If anybody's had it rough from 1.x, it's probably been Yinlin. The thing with Shangli Yao is that you could play him in Shangli Quickswap, and that team would generally perform just as well, if not better, than just using Yinlin. Granted, Yinlin does offer a more low skill level playstyle, which some people do prefer in fairness. However, that aside, she doesn't really find herself with that many relevant use cases nowadays anymore, and she just kind of exists. There's not really a point to pull her. Jinchi has plenty of other teammate options. There's not really a reason to get her for Jinchi specifically at this stage, and I already said that with Shangli Yao. Well, for starters, he's not really worth getting anymore, but if you still insist on playing him, then you would rather play Changli instead. And there's Hyper Calcharo too, but come on, you're not being serious, are you? Even if you were being serious, it's another situation in which you would rather just play Calcharo with Shangli Yao and just quick swap them with each other. Another thing is that old 4-stars, at least the good ones that are noteworthy, they're still very good and only continue to get better. Mortefi's still a great unit, Sanhwa's still a great unit, both of them have not fallen off whatsoever in my opinion. Mortefi just kind of continues to be good at his main thing, which is buffing up heavy attacks, and Sanhwa only continues to be a very flexible unit, thanks to having barely any field time whatsoever. She remains as being an absolutely fantastic budget option. However, one other thing that I should add is that these older DPSs do continue to get new options in new regions. They're not left behind. Jinchi manages to use Cantarella. She can use Brant as well if you have Arena as your third slot teammate to provide coordinated attacks. Gion's able to use Shakona and Arrow Rover, and the list goes on. Ultimately, you can definitely main an older DPS and still get by just fine. Like I said at the start of this video, it's kind of hard to point these things out, mostly because Wuthering Waves definitely has some really good balancing, and you can main basically anyone and get away with it just fine. With enough practice and enough investment and patience, you can clear with just about everyone. But regardless, I still thought it would be interesting to just kind of see how the meta's changed over 2-point decks, and I'm also curious to see how it's going to change over 3-point decks. These meta changes tend to be quite subtle in my opinion. I don't really actively go, oh my goodness, what a big meta change. Aside from perhaps the fact that Augusta is definitely going to be replacing Shangli. Otherwise, things have generally been very seamless, and I feel like if you mostly play older characters, you're not going to have too much difficulty as long as you continue to invest into them. Regardless, what do you think about all of this? Have 1-point decks' DPS has fallen off? I'd love to hear your perspective. Hopefully this video is able to tell you whether Wuthering Waves' old units are falling off or not. This has been Juice, signing out. And I'll probably still be using Gion in version 9.7 or whatever.